Sarah Martinez adjusted her seatbelt as Flight 447 prepared for takeoff from Denver International Airport. The Boeing 737 was packed with weekend travelers heading to Phoenix, and she had managed to snag a window seat in row 12. She pulled out her tablet, planning to catch up on some reading during the 2-hour flight. To everyone around her, she appeared to be just another passenger, a woman in her early 30s wearing jeans and a casual sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. What her fellow passengers didn't know was that Sarah had spent the last 8 years as a commercial airline pilot for a major carrier. She had recently taken a leave of absence after a difficult divorce, using the time to visit her sister in Colorado and clear her head. Flying as a passenger felt strange after years of being in the cockpit, but she tried to relax and enjoy the rare opportunity to see the world from the other side. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sarah noticed the flight attendants going through their safety demonstration with practiced efficiency. The lead attendant, a woman named Jennifer with kind eyes and graying hair, caught Sarah's attention with her calm professionalism. Sarah had worked with hundreds of flight attendants over the years and could always spot the experienced ones who truly cared about passenger safety. The takeoff was smooth, and Sarah found herself automatically listening to the subtle sounds of the aircraft, the whir of the engines, the slight shift in air pressure, the gentle vibration through the fuselage. These sounds were like a familiar song to her, each note telling her something about the plane's performance. Everything seemed normal as they climbed to cruising altitude. About 30 minutes into the flight, Sarah was absorbed in her book when she heard an unusual sound from the front of the plane. It was subtle, just a slight commotion that most passengers probably didn't even notice. But Sarah's trained ear picked up on the urgency in the flight attendants' voices. She looked up to see Jennifer and another attendant moving quickly toward the cockpit, their faces tense with concern. Sarah's heart rate increased as she watched the scene unfold. She knew that when flight attendants moved with that kind of purpose, something was wrong. Her pilot instincts kicked in, and she found herself mentally running through emergency procedures even though she was sitting in row 12, not in the captain's seat. The plane continued to fly normally, maintaining its altitude and heading, but Sarah could sense the change in atmosphere among the crew. Other passengers remained oblivious, chatting and scrolling through their phones, but Sarah's trained eyes caught every detail. She saw how the flight attendants exchanged meaningful glances and how they began quietly positioning themselves throughout the cabin. Then came the announcement that would change everything. Jennifer's voice came over the intercom, and despite her attempt to sound calm, Sarah could hear the underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue and will need to make an unscheduled landing. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." Sarah knew immediately that this was no minor technical issue. In her 8 years of flying, she had never seen a crew react this way to routine problems. Something serious was happening in the cockpit, and as the only licensed commercial pilot on board, she might be the passenger's only hope of getting safely back on the ground. Jennifer hurried down the aisle, her professional smile unable to mask the worry in her eyes. Sarah watched as she stopped to whisper something to the passenger in the aisle seat of row 8, then continued moving through the cabin. The announcement about a technical issue hung in the air, but Sarah's experience told her this was much more serious. Unable to sit still any longer, Sarah pressed the call button. When Jennifer approached her row, Sarah spoke quietly but urgently. "I'm a commercial pilot," she said, showing Jennifer her pilot's license from her wallet. "What's really happening up there?" Jennifer's eyes widened with a mixture of relief and desperation. She leaned down and whispered, "Captain Morrison collapsed about 5 minutes ago. The first officer, Jake, is only 24 and has less than 2 years of experience. He's never handled an emergency landing alone and he's starting to panic. We've been trying to reach air traffic control, but the radio system is acting up." Sarah's stomach dropped. A collapsed captain and an inexperienced first officer was a nightmare scenario. She had been in Jake's position once early in her career when her captain had become violently ill during a storm. She remembered the overwhelming fear and the weight of responsibility for everyone on board. "What about Captain Morrison? Is he conscious?" Sarah asked, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "He's breathing but unconscious. We think it might be his heart," Jennifer replied. "The passenger in 8A is a nurse and she's with him now. But Jake needs help in the cockpit. He's trying to maintain altitude, but I can see his hands shaking from here." Sarah stood up, drawing curious looks from nearby passengers. I'm current on the 737. I can help, she said firmly. Take me to the cockpit now. As they made their way toward the front of the plane, Sarah's mind raced through emergency procedures. She thought about her own first solo emergency years ago, and how her captain's steady voice had guided her through it. Now she would need to be that steady voice for Jake. The cockpit door was already open when they arrived. Sarah could see the young first officer hunched over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cabin air. Captain Morrison lay unconscious in the captain's seat while a woman Sarah assumed was the nurse checked his pulse and monitored his breathing. "Jake," Sarah said calmly as she entered the cockpit. "I'm Sarah Martinez, commercial pilot with 8 years of experience on the 737. I'm here to help." Jake looked up with grateful but fearful eyes. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice shaking. "The captain just collapsed and we've lost contact with Denver Tower. I've never flown alone in an emergency. All these alarms keep going off and I can't figure out what's wrong." Sarah quickly scanned the instrument panel, her trained eyes immediately identifying several warning lights. The hydraulic pressure was dropping, explaining the radio problems, and there were indications of engine irregularities on the number 2 engine. This wasn't just a medical emergency anymore, they were dealing with multiple system failures. "Okay. Jake, first thing we need to do is breathe," Sarah said, settling into the jump seat behind the pilot positions. "You're doing fine. The plane is stable and we have options. Let's work through this together, step by step." Sarah quickly assessed the situation in the cockpit. The warning lights painted a troubling picture: hydraulic system failure, communications issues, and engine performance problems on the number 2 engine. Captain Morrison remained unconscious in his seat while the nurse, who had introduced herself as Linda, continued monitoring his vital signs. "Jake, I need you to focus on my voice," Sarah said calmly. "First, let's get our priorities straight. Fly the airplane, navigate, then communicate. The plane is still flying, which means we have time to figure this out." Jake nodded, his grip on the controls loosening slightly. The hydraulic warning came on right after the captain collapsed. Then the radio started cutting out, and now the engine readings are all over the place. Sarah leaned forward to study the instruments more closely. Her years of experience kicked in as she quickly diagnosed the cascade of failures. "This looks like a hydraulic leak that's affecting multiple systems. The good news is that the 737 has backup systems for almost everything. We just need to know how to use them." She guided Jake through switching to the backup hydraulic system, and immediately several warning lights disappeared. The radio crackled back to life, and they could hear air traffic control trying to reach them. "Flight 447, please respond. We show you off course and have lost your transponder signal." Jake reached for the radio, but his hands were still shaking. Sarah gently placed her hand over his. "Let me take this one," she said. "Flight 447, this is. Passenger Sarah Martinez, commercial pilot, speaking for First Officer Collins. We have declared an emergency. Captain Morrison is unconscious, and we've experienced multiple system failures, requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport." There was a pause before the controller responded. "Flight 447, confirm you said passenger pilot. Please state your credentials and current situation." "Air traffic control. I am Captain Sarah Martinez, 8 years commercial experience, current type rating on 737-800. Captain Morrison suffered what appears to be a cardiac event approximately 15 minutes ago. First Officer Collins is flying the aircraft. We've had hydraulic failures affecting communications and engine performance. We have 156 souls on board and need immediate assistance." The formality of stating her rank and credentials felt strange after months away from the cockpit, but Sarah knew the controllers needed to understand they were dealing with a qualified pilot. The response was immediate and professional. "Captain Martinez, Denver Center. We're vectoring you to Denver International, runway 16R. Emergency services are standing by. Current weather is clear, winds light. You're cleared direct to Den. Maintain flight level 280 for now. We'll start your descent in 10 minutes." Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. They had communication, they had a destination, and they had help on the ground. Now came the hard part, getting everyone safely down with a compromised aircraft and an inexperienced first officer. "Jake, you're doing great," she told the young pilot. "I know this is scary, but you've been trained for this. I'm going to walk you through everything just like your instructors did in training. We're going to get everyone home safe. Behind them, Linda looked up from checking Captain Morrison's pulse. His heartbeat is irregular, but he's stable for now. How long until we land? About 30 minutes if everything goes smoothly, Sarah replied. Can you keep him stable that long? Linda nodded grimly. I'll do my best, but he needs medical attention as soon as possible. Sarah turned back to Jake and the instruments. 30 minutes to get 156 people safely on the ground with failing systems and a medical emergency. In her career, she had trained for scenarios like this, but she had never imagined she would face one while sitting in row 12. As Flight 447 began its descent toward Denver, Sarah noticed the number 2 engine readings becoming more erratic. The hydraulic leak was getting worse, affecting engine performance and making the aircraft increasingly difficult to control. Jake was doing his best, but she could see the strain on his face as the plane required more and more input to maintain stable flight. The controls are getting heavy, Jake reported, beads of sweat visible on his forehead. It feels like the plane wants to pull to the right. Sarah studied the engine instruments and confirmed her suspicions. We're losing thrust on the number 2 engine. The hydraulic leak is affecting the fuel flow. We need to shut it down before it fails completely and causes more problems. The thought of shutting down an engine terrified Jake. I've never done a single engine approach before. Only in the simulator, and that was months ago. Jake, look at me, Sarah said firmly. This aircraft can fly perfectly well on one engine. Airlines wouldn't put passengers on planes that couldn't handle engine failures. You know the procedures, we just need to execute them carefully. With Sarah guiding him step by step, Jake followed the engine shutdown checklist. The number 2 engine wound down to a stop, and immediately the aircraft became more stable. The pull to the right disappeared, and Jake's confidence grew slightly. Denver approach Flight 447, Sarah called on the radio. We've shut down the number 2 engine due to mechanical failure. Requesting priority handling for single-engine approach to runway 16R. Flight 447, Denver approach. You're cleared for straight-in approach runway 16R. Fire and rescue equipment is standing by. Current winds calm. You're number 1 for the runway. In the cabin, Jennifer had quietly informed the other flight attendants about the situation. They were preparing the passengers for an emergency landing without causing panic. The cabin remained relatively calm, with most passengers unaware of how serious their situation had become. Linda looked up from Captain Morrison. His color is getting worse. How much longer? Sarah checked their position on the navigation display. 12 minutes to touchdown if we maintain this approach speed. She turned to Jake. How are you feeling about the landing? Scared, Jake admitted honestly. But better with you here. What if I mess it up? You won't mess it up because I won't let you, Sarah replied. I've done hundreds of single-engine approaches. It's actually easier than you think. The plane flies more predictably without the dead engine. We'll configure for landing early, keep our speed up until we're sure we can make the runway, then execute a normal landing. The emergency crews are there just as a precaution. As they continued the approach, Sarah found herself thinking about all the passengers depending on them. Families heading home from vacation, business travelers, young couples starting new adventures. Each person had trusted their lives to the airline's promise to get them safely to their destination. Flaps to 5 degrees, Sarah instructed. Landing gear down. Jake followed her commands, and the aircraft configured normally despite the hydraulic issues. The backup systems were holding, and the single remaining engine was running smoothly. Flight 447, you're looking good on the approach, came the voice from the tower. Wind calm, runway is yours. Emergency equipment is in position. Through the windscreen, they could see Denver International Airport ahead. The runway lights formed a perfect line leading to safety, and Jake's hands were steady on the controls for the first time since the emergency began. 500 feet, Sarah called out, monitoring their altitude. Looking good, Jake, just like the simulator, except this one's for real. You've got this. The runway at Denver International grew larger in the windscreen as Flight 447 descended through the final 200 feet. Sarah kept her voice calm and steady, calling out altitudes and speeds to Jake, who was flying the most important approach of his young career. 100 feet looking good, Sarah announced. 50 feet ease back on the power. 20 feet start your flare. Jake pulled back gently on the controls and the Boeing 737 settled toward the runway. Despite everything that had gone wrong, his landing was smooth and controlled. The main wheels touched down with barely a bump, and Jake immediately deployed the thrust reversers on the remaining engine. "Nice landing, Jake," Sarah said with genuine admiration. "Absolutely textbook." The relief in the cockpit was immediate, but Sarah knew they weren't completely safe yet. "Keep it rolling straight down the center line. The fire trucks are following us, but that's just standard procedure." As the aircraft slowed and turned off the runway, Sarah could see the emergency vehicles with their flashing lights surrounding them. Paramedics were already positioning themselves near where the plane would stop, ready to help Captain Morrison. "Flight 447, Denver Tower. Excellent job bringing her in. Taxi to Gate A12, emergency crews will meet you there." Jake's hands were shaking again, but this time from adrenaline and relief rather than fear. "I can't believe we did it. I was so sure I was going to crash." "You never would have crashed," Sarah assured him. "You're a good pilot, Jake. You just needed someone to believe in you. Today, you saved 156 lives." In the passenger cabin, Jennifer made the announcement that they had landed safely and that emergency personnel would be boarding to assist with a medical situation. Most passengers still didn't realize how close they had come to disaster. As the aircraft came to a stop at the gate, the cockpit door opened, and paramedics rushed in to attend to Captain Morrison. Linda quickly briefed them on his condition while Sarah and Jake completed the shutdown procedures for the remaining engine. "Captain Martinez," one of the paramedics said after they had stabilized Morrison for transport. "The captain is conscious now and asking for you." Sarah moved to Morrison's side as they prepared to move him to a stretcher. His eyes were alert despite his pale appearance. "Sarah," he whispered, "I heard what you did. Thank you for taking care of my crew and my passengers." "Just returning the favor," Sarah replied, remembering all the captains who had mentored her over the years. "You trained Jake well. He did most of the work." Captain Morrison managed a weak smile before the paramedics wheeled him away. Jake stood nearby, still processing everything that had happened. "What happens now?" he asked Sarah. "Now the FAA will investigate, the airline will review the incident, and you'll probably get some additional training," Sarah explained. "But more importantly, you'll go home tonight knowing that when it really mattered, you came through for everyone on this airplane." Jennifer approached them as passengers began to deplane. "Captain Martinez, I don't know how to thank you. When I saw Jake struggling up here and Captain Morrison unconscious, I thought we were all going to die." "That's what we're trained for," Sarah replied simply. "Besides, I was just a passenger who happened to know how to help. Jake is the real hero here. He kept flying when everything was falling apart." As Sarah gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the aircraft, she realized that this experience had reminded her why she became a pilot in the first place. It wasn't about the routine flights or the regular schedules. It was about moments like this when skills and training could mean the difference between life and death for everyone on board. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in the airport's crew lounge, still wearing her jeans and sweater, feeling surreal about the day's events. The FAA investigators had already interviewed her twice, and airline executives were flying in from headquarters to understand how a passenger had ended up helping land their aircraft. Jake found her there, looking exhausted but relieved. "The chief pilot wants to see both of us tomorrow," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "I think I'm going to be grounded for additional training." "That's not punishment," Sarah told him. "That's the airline investing in making you even better. After today, you'll be one of the most experienced young pilots in the fleet when it comes to real emergency situations." "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been on board," Jake admitted. "I was so close to losing it completely. The passengers would have known something was really wrong." Sarah shook her head. "You're selling yourself short. Yes, you were scared, anyone would be, but you never stopped flying the airplane. You maintained altitude, you followed procedures, and you listened to guidance. Those are the marks of a good pilot." A news crew was setting up in the terminal, having caught wind of the story. Sarah could see reporters interviewing passengers who were describing their routine flight, with no idea how close they had come to disaster. Linda, the nurse who had cared for Captain Morrison, approached their table. "I wanted to thank you both before I catch my connecting flight. The doctors at the hospital said Captain Morrison is stable. He had a mild heart attack, but he's going to be fine. How are you holding up?" Sarah asked. "You were dealing with a medical emergency while we were handling the mechanical issues. I'm just glad everyone is okay," Linda replied. "I've been a nurse for 15 years. but I've never had to work on a patient while worrying about whether the plane was going to crash. You two made it possible for me to focus on helping him." After Linda left, Jake turned to Sarah. "Can I ask you something? Why did you quit flying? With your experience, you could probably be a captain at any major airline." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I took a leave of absence after my divorce. I thought I wanted out of aviation completely. Too much stress, too much time away from home. But today reminded me why I love this job. We don't just transport people from one place to another. Sometimes we're literally the difference between life and death. Are you going to come back?" Before Sarah could answer, Jennifer appeared with the airline station manager, a serious-looking man in his 50s. "Captain Martinez, I'm Dave Wilson, station manager here at Denver. I've been instructed by headquarters to offer you whatever assistance you need, and to express the airline's gratitude for your actions today." "I was just doing what any pilot would do," Sarah replied. "Maybe, but not every pilot would have been as calm and effective as you were today," Wilson said. "I understand you're currently on leave from flying. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities with our airline? We could use someone with your experience and judgment." Sarah glanced at Jake, who was listening intently. "I might be interested in coming back to flying," she admitted. "Today reminded me that this job isn't just about the routine flights. It's about being ready when people need you most." The passengers from today's flight are already spreading the word on social media about the mystery pilot who helped save their flight. Wilson continued, "You're going to be getting attention whether you want it or not." Indeed, Sarah's phone had been buzzing with messages from friends and family who had seen news reports about Flight 447. The story was already being called The Passenger Pilot by news outlets. As Wilson left to handle other matters, Jake turned to Sarah. "If you do come back to flying, I hope we get to fly together again sometime, but maybe under less exciting circumstances." Sarah smiled. "I'd like that. And Jake? Today proved you have what it takes to be a great pilot. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Outside the lounge window, Sarah could see Flight 447 still parked at the gate, surrounded by maintenance crews working to repair the hydraulic systems. In a few hours, after thorough inspections and repairs, the aircraft would be ready to fly again, just like Sarah herself was ready to return to the skies. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Martinez walked through the crew briefing room at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, wearing the 4 stripes of an airline captain on her uniform sleeves. She had accepted the position with the same airline that operated Flight 447, and today marked her return to regular flying duties. "Captain Martinez?" a young voice called out behind her. She turned to see Jake Collins approaching, also wearing a captain's uniform but with the 3 stripes of a first officer. "Jake, look at you in the uniform," Sarah said warmly. "How's the additional training going?" "Just finished my final check ride last week," Jake replied with a confident smile that was very different from the terrified expression she remembered from that day in the cockpit. "They're transitioning me to the 737 MAX next month. I'm actually excited about it now instead of scared. That's what I like to hear." "What changed?" Jake thought for a moment. "I think it was realizing that being scared doesn't make you a bad pilot. It makes you human. The important thing is not letting the fear control you. You taught me that." Sarah felt proud of how far Jake had come. The young pilot who had been shaking with terror 6 months ago was now confident and eager for new challenges. "Have you heard from Captain Morrison lately?" "Actually, yes. He's retiring next month, and he specifically requested that I be his first officer on his final flight. He said he wants to fly with the guy who saved his passengers when he couldn't." "That's wonderful. Jake, you deserve that recognition." Their conversation was interrupted by Jennifer, the flight attendant from Flight 447, who was also part of Sarah's crew for today's flight to Denver. Ironically, the same route where their adventure had begun. "Captain Martinez, the passengers are boarding and we have a full load today," Jennifer reported. "And there's something you should know. We have several passengers on board who were on Flight 447 6 months ago. They specifically requested to fly when they heard you were the captain." Sarah was surprised. "Really, how did they know?" "The story has become something of a legend among frequent flyers," Jennifer explained. "People feel safer knowing their captain is someone who has proven herself in a real emergency." One passenger, Mrs. Chen from seat 14A, said she won't fly with any other captain now. As Sarah made her way to the cockpit for the pre-flight briefing, She reflected on how much had changed since that day when she was just another passenger in row 12. Her divorce was finalized, but she had found peace with it. More importantly, she had rediscovered her passion for flying and her purpose as a pilot. The pre-flight inspection went smoothly, and soon Flight 447, the same flight number, but a different aircraft, was pushing back from the gate. As they taxied for takeoff, Sarah's first officer, an experienced pilot named Mark, commented on the passenger manifest. "We've got several passengers today who specifically requested to fly with you, Captain. That's pretty unusual." "They were on the original Flight 447, Sarah explained. "I think they feel safer knowing their pilot has been tested in a real emergency." "Well, let's hope today's flight is completely boring," Mark said with a laugh. "I'll drink to that," Sarah agreed as they lined up on the runway. The takeoff was routine, and as they climbed through 10,000 feet, Sarah made the passenger announcement. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Martinez speaking. We're climbing to our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet for today's flight to Denver. Weather looks good and we should arrive right on time." She paused, then added, "For those passengers who were with us on Flight 447 6 months ago, welcome back. I'm honored to have you flying with us again today." The cabin erupted in applause, clearly audible even in the cockpit. Sarah smiled, realizing that sometimes the most important journeys aren't about getting from one place to another. They're about discovering who you are when everything is on the line. As Flight 447 cruised peacefully toward Denver at 37,000 feet, Sarah reflected on the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, she had been a passenger trying to escape from flying. Today, she was back where she belonged, with passengers who trusted her completely because they had seen her at her best when things were at their worst. The flight was completely uneventful, exactly the way Sarah preferred it. But she knew that if another emergency ever arose, she would be ready. More importantly, she had helped train a new generation of pilots like Jake who would also be ready when their moment came. That was what being a pilot really meant, not just flying the airplane, but being prepared to protect every life on board when it mattered most.